Hello, everybody out there in the world. Oh no, we're buffering. Are we done buffering? Okay, now I think we are live out there in the world. And welcome to you out there, whoever you may be. This is David Rovix with another of my, in my series of last Saturday of the month concerts on various platforms, including YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, VK, LinkedIn, and Twitch. And whichever those platforms you might be watching on, please feel free to share the broadcast. Take a moment to share the broadcast with your friends, and it's all going to be they'll all be archived. They're all archived on in my YouTube channel at youtube.com/drovix and in podcast form. If you look for This Week with David Rovix on any podcasting platform, Spotify, Apple, Google, whatever. And I am now successfully able to once again see messages. So if you're watching on any of those platforms, then if you write, I will be able to see the messages in between songs, which was not the case for several weeks. Basically, because things changed as they do with these platforms, and then I lost track of how it worked. So I had to figure out how it was now working. So now I know how it's now working, or at least one way. But then they'll change again. That's how it goes. As Steve Wozniak said, those who design digital technology should be forced to live with them. I believe that's what he's paraphrasing, at least. But so this is a little musical. So, although I can see your comments, what I cannot see is how many people are viewing on any of the platforms. There used to be a number. That number's gone. It's still gone. I don't care. So that and it was apparently a misleading number in the first place. So that's just fine, But I can see messages such as Ryan's message that just tuned in from Wales. Wales, wonderful. Merry Christmas there in Wales. So yeah, I can see messages, and it's lovely to see them. If anybody wants to say hello or wants to, ask a question, make a comment, whatever you like. But the theme for today's broadcast, to once again disappoint anybody who may be hoping for other things, is a review of 2020, which has been quite a year, as you know. And it began without a pandemic, and it began with lots of crises, but not this particular crisis. And at the very beginning of 2020, actually, we were right in the midst of an impeachment trial, if you recall. And oh, by the way, one of the things I'd like to know is, does it sound okay? Like, I have the sound set up in a new way because that also changed. So, a wonderful Chiapas and Wales, wonderful. And yeah, if it sounds distorted, please let me know. I can change. I can change the input level. If it's not loud enough, there's nothing I can do. If it's too loud, I can do things. So anyway, at the beginning of 2020, as I recall, looking back, and by the way, I mean, not to be too self-promote. I'll be self-promotional, whatever. You're watching my YouTube channel or Facebook, what the heck. But I have a book that is at the printer, getting in its final stages of getting fixed up for printing, and it already exists in PDF form for my community supported art members, folks who are patrons from Patreon or at davidrovix.com/subscribe or via Bandcamp. If you're one of my paid supporters, you get the PDF, and the book is also available. And the book is a survey of things I've written throughout 2020. Not everything, just a selected, curated survey of some of the songs and some of the essays. And this concert here today from my living room in Portland, Oregon, is a far more selective survey from that survey. Because we're not going to be here all day. We're just going to do a little concert kind of length thing for you from my living room, which incidentally looks like it's designed for this sort of thing because this curtain I have here, which is not actually set up originally for this purpose, but it works very well. So, oh good, we got Scandinavia, no, Sacramento, Mexico, and Wales. I think there should always be at least 3 countries represented in anything I'm doing online. Otherwise, what's the point? It's the internet. So at the beginning of 2020, there was an impeachment trial going on. There was a lot going on. There was bad and good. Among other things, I'll have you recall, was we were looking at the prospect of Bernie Sanders becoming the nominee for the Democratic Party. To whatever extent electoral politics factors into things. So it was, to some extent, a hopeful time, but anyway, not so hopeful for the mainstream of the Democratic Party. As far as I'm never hopeful about them, so I had to write a song about the impeachment trial, which I was getting very tired of hearing about. I mean, this is like, I get tired of American media generally, but it was like really getting old so quickly. This is a sing-along too, You can sing along as long as, nobody, but I won't know that you're singing along 2 seconds late. It's okay. Nobody else will know. It's okay. And you might not be, depending on what time zone you're in. Ever since the election that brought the orange man in, there have been those repining for things to be how they had been. Remembering the good old days of 1992, so maybe after we impeach the president, we impeach the Democrats too. From the time I turn on the radio to the time I turn it off, it's a testimony from the pigs feeding at the trough, complaining of corruption, but corrupt through and through. So maybe after we impeach the president, we impeach the Democrats too. With these proceedings going on, they found time to pass a budget. $700 billion for more bombs and Boeing jets. Yes, when it comes to corporate welfare, they all know what to do. Maybe after we impeach the president, we impeach the Democrats too. In the urban centers, progressives come to swarm, walking past the tents that have been there since welfare was reformed. When all the wrecking balls began to swing around here right on cue, maybe after we impeach the president, we impeach the Democrats too. Listen to the congressman lecture us on what the rule of law affords for any vice president's son who sits on advisory boards. Any vice president's son, I guess a president's daughter will do, but maybe after we impeach the president, we impeach the Democrats too. They talk of foreign policies that once were so darn good, as if Goldman Sachs and Raytheon work for Robin Hood. If you're gonna play dress up like that, at least wear a decent ruse. Maybe after we impeach the president, we impeach the Democrats too. Perhaps I'm not your target audience, whose head you seek to fill with all this nonsense about your city on a hill. I can't afford to live in it, but I'll come to the barbecue after we impeach the president, when we impeach the Democrats too. After we impeach the president, when we impeach the Democrats too. So that's kind of January, to some extent. And I'm just looking at these comments. We got folks watching from Vancouver, British Columbia, and Ireland, and Australia, and Scotland. Oh, wonderful, wonderful! It's just wonderful. I love that. I love the world. So, and other things that were happening at the beginning of 2020, long before the pandemic, you could say, was we were imprisoning more people than any other country in the world here in the United States, far more per capita, I believe, than anywhere in the world. Not far more, I believe, but far more than anywhere else in the world. The U.S. competes with certain select countries in terms of things like executions per capita. We win generally, but I think we're sometimes behind Iran, North Korea, China. That's like... But now, of course, we got prisoners being so much more likely to get COVID and all sorts of other things. And nobody's hearing distortion, right? Saudi Arabia, wonderful. And tell me if anybody hears distortion when I'm singing, or if you can't hear the guitar. I'm trying to get the mix right here, but tell me about those things too, if you hear anything like that. But early in 2020, I got a letter in the mail from a friend in Texas, and it was basically written on stationery that educated me about a prisoner who is coming up for parole in 2021, incidentally. And in the wake of all the movements that have been going on around police violence, it would sure make sense for people in Texas. If anybody out there is in Texas, somebody needs to be on top of this case and trying to get attention and get the parole board on it. Alvaro Luna Hernandez started life with a sword at hand, growing up in Texas on occupied land. His troubles with the law, with the sheriff of Alpine, resulted from a racist gang crossing every line of respect for human decency. Vicious thugs in blue who've ruled the hills of Texas since long before 52. In the middle of the 20th, when Alvaro was born, it wasn't long before the first time that he was torn from the streets of Alpine to a windowless cell. When the cops kicked his head till no one could tell if he'd live or die, and somehow he was breathing still when the morning sun was shining in the Texas hills. Alvaro Luna Hernandez grew up to lead the fight against police corruption and for human rights. Falsely accused of murder, incessantly harassed, a young life in constant danger, quickly flying past. So on the day a cop came to his house, pointed his gun, Alvaro knocked it out of the officer's hands, and he did run. Alvaro Luna Hernandez hid out underground after the biggest manhunt in West Texas. They fired many rounds. He managed to surrender without being shot, and that was the last breath out of prison that he ever got. The trial was a sham. He was given 50 years, sentenced by the machine to be ground up in the gears. since 1996, a quarter century ago. In solitary confinement, they've kept Alvaro. He's now lived to be an old man, and whether he ever leaves, justice in the USA exists only for the thieves who came and stole this country, declared it to be theirs. Slave masters in power, Chicanos in the crosshairs. Alvaro Luna Hernandez started life with a shorted hand, growing up in Texas on occupied land. Just looking at comments here, and I like the applause comments. That's good. And yes, 5% of the world's population with 25% of its prisoners. Is that right? That sounds about accurate, which is just absolutely madness. Also 25% of its COVID cases. I wonder if that's a coincidence. So we're doing a musical review of 2020. We are broadcasting on my YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, VK, LinkedIn, and Twitch channels. If you're watching on any one of those platforms and you feel like sharing this broadcast with other people, feel free. And this is can also be found in podcast form later if you look for This Week with David Rovics, wherever you get your podcasts. And we're doing a review of 2020 here, and a very selective, partial review of 2020. For a slightly less selective one, check out the book that I wrote on this subject of 2020, which is called, what is it called? David Rovics on 2020. Very fancy name. And so this is one of many, many concerts on the internet I've done since the pandemic shut down all the tours and stuff. And I'm just going to stop looking at the screen where I see myself and I'm just seeing the comments. I'll just trust that I'm on there. If people are commenting, they're probably watching me. I don't need to confirm that I'm there. I think I know I'm there. And the coffee tastes better when I'm not watching myself drink it anyway. Oh yeah, good. It's telling me that StreamYard is using my microphone, so don't try to use it on this platform here that I'm watching the comments on. Anyway, you don't. Only the geeks care about such bizarre little technical stuff. But we're all geeks these days, depending on what kind. So at the beginning of 2020, well, no, we're moving. We're doing about a song a month here. This is a very, very, curated survey. And moving up to March, I'm traveling around Australia, playing wonderful gigs, meeting lovely people, seeing the aftermath of the fires that had recently ravaged the whole country, and meeting traumatized fire survivors. And then the pandemic hit, and then it was becoming clear that things are changing quick, and everybody was going to be canceling their plans and going home. And good, and speak of the devil. There we go, from New South Wales, and then as well, hello Elsa, Berlin. So then, before coming home early. This was the second of the virus songs. I wrote a virus song before leaving for Australia too. But I guess I wasn't really, countries were locking down, right? The whole thing was starting to happen. I just wasn't thinking it was going to happen to the U.S. Because I just didn't think that it would be like, leaders here would care about the people enough to do such drastic things. But I live and learn. For whatever reason, they're doing whatever they're doing, I'm not saying it's all about caring by any means, but it's interesting. So let's see, this song, this is This was the second virus song I wrote. And you can see a wonderful version of me and Kamala singing it in Australia. The whole set that was recorded by filmmakers in Sydney, in fact. It was just about the last concert I've done for an actual audience that wasn't at a protest. Not to discount protests. I love protest audiences. Usually the sound system isn't as good, though. Atmosphere is somewhat wanting when it comes to, acoustics. There's foreboding in the air, waiting for an earthquake. Pandemic spreading, no telling how it might remake a world so divided in so many, many ways. Anyone can see it's no way to greet such days when you can shut your borders, but it'll barely slow the spread. With 1 million people homeless and not enough hospital beds. In times like these, we find out that a society is only just as strong as our solidarity. I didn't review this musical review, so excuse the incorrect chord structures. The foreboding in the air can get only thicker as we see our leaders passing blame and getting sicker. A crashing economy, leaders fraught with indecision, only capable of thinking like bought-off politicians. Not enough testing kits, and the ones you got were broken, but hey, the president has spoken. In times like these, we find out that a society is only just as strong as our solidarity. 1 million people woke up in the morning thinking thoughts they never had, till they found that they were sinking on a cruise ship full of holes, where if you can't catch the breeze, there are no fences tall enough to keep out the disease. Lifting every boat or watching them all sink, ready or not, we're standing on the brink. In times like these, we find out that a society is only just as strong as our solidarity. Contain an epidemic like in Wuhan or in Seoul, or watch a catastrophe take its toll. Hide behind our gates, cowering afraid, or organize our neighbors in mutual aid. In synchronicity, such great things can be done. A planet to lose, or a world to be won. In times like these, we find out that a society is only just as strong as our solidarity. In times like these, we find out that a society is only just as strong as our solidarity. So then, basically, we all started becoming amateur virologists, and we all started imagining how if we could radically transform society before it implodes from the pressure of the fissures being so terribly exacerbated by the pandemic's economic and medical impacts in the context of capitalism. I started thinking about a lot of things, reading about a lot of things, writing, debating, organizing. Lots of stuff was happening in the midst of the isolation. But one of the things what was going on was people reading about history, particularly a certain chapter. And as we think about history and, certain various chapters in history, I would encourage everyone out there to do this little exercise, actually, as I mentioned in this song. But look into it, because there's something that the mythology is that martyrs or those who die in dramatic ways, or those who die young, or there's certain ideas that we have about some people are going to be remembered for some reason, and that it's wishful thinking. Of course, everyone will ultimately be forgotten, but the the idea that we will remember people for longer who maybe sacrificed more or something it's wishful thinking. It's not true, actually. People that die young get forgotten faster, generally, because they didn't create as much of an impression. They didn't have time to. And if you look back at your own family history, you can bear that out easily. Because if you look at it, you will find, quite likely, that somebody in your not too extended family died of what was known as the Spanish flu in 1918, wherever in the world you're from. Incidentally, this is not just for people in certain places. I'm talking about the planet. Wherever you're from, wherever you're watching right now, you probably had family members who died in 1918 of the Spanish flu. And probably they're not people that are often talked about in the family lore, because they were probably they probably died young. They probably did not have children. World War was raging like the earth had never seen. Whole generation lined up in trenches with killing machines. But aside from a few islands and some mountain peaks, the pandemic killed more people in just 24 weeks. No one knows where it began. Speculation's gone on for years. The trenches of Europe is where the deadly strain appears. From packed trains and hospitals around the globe it spread, the war strain of the virus that left so many dead. The death toll wasn't equal, but barely anywhere was left untouched, though the greatest share of dying was reserved for the poorest colonies of the empires and their wars that created this disease. If you have a couple hours, then do something with me. Conduct a little research into your family tree. If you look into it, it won't take long. Quite likely you will find in 1918 you left an ancestor behind. The pandemic knew no borders. It went from the front lines, which had increased its deadliness as if by design. It circled the whole planet. So many people died. They dug mass graves everywhere. Put your relatives inside. A world war was raging like the earth had never seen. A whole generation lined up in trenches with killing machines. But aside from a few islands and some mountain peaks, the pandemic killed more people in just 24 weeks. Now, Jeff Milne, you pointed out that Mozart was 36. Yes. Same was with Phil Oakes. I mean, yes. And Mozart has been remembered, so there's a very good point. There's definitely an exception there. good to see. People are watching from Southern California. Southern California is clearly still there. That is good. So then, so as we're familiarizing with ourselves with history and feeling isolated and losing our jobs, trying to navigate the unemployment system, whatever else is going on, along with all that, then we're realizing that, people are dying. And the people who are dying the most are the very so-called hero essential workers that are being paid shit wages, who are, being purposefully allowed to, or shoved into the front lines and, harm's way because they need a job. And then they call them heroes, and then they die. So it was, I guess, early April, somewhere around there, when the first bus driver in Detroit died of COVID-19. A pandemic is spreading, the health system's collapsing. You can watch it all unfolding on the screen. If you're afraid to go outside, enough groceries to hide. It may have been weeks since you have seen someone you can touch, and you miss it so much as you wonder what might happen next. Like when your savings run out and the choice is all about what kind of help you might be able to expect. Or perhaps when COVID arrived, while some struggled to survive, you were what they call essential. It didn't take long to see you got that wrong. The word they really meant was expendable. It didn't take long to see there was no emergency. Plans in place for something which all the scientists knew was just a matter of when there'd be a pandemic again. And the kleptocrats in power didn't have a clue. Otherwise, why did Jason Hargrove die? Because he kept keeping on, waking before dawn to do his part for society. Jason drove his bus, didn't even make a fuss at the time of the impropriety. Somebody coughed, the virus was off. Not 2 weeks later, Jason would be dead. What if he had protective gear with sick passengers so near, with no barrier to protect his head? Why did Jason Hargrove die? Stay home, flatten the curve, they say, unless we need you to serve food for us or care for all the ill. In that case, we'll call you a hero, like the workers at Ground Zero, where one by one the cemetery filled. Now in every bus and truck, the drivers try their luck, essentially told, thank you for your service. If these were the front lines, no one put up any signs. Did anybody sign up for this? Why did Jason Hargrove die? Once the death rate peaks, in days or months or weeks, with each one of the virus's waves, once we can take stock and recover from the shock of the sight of all of the mass graves, will this be the impetus, this driver on a bus, along with so many, many more? The nurses and practitioners, seafarers and farm workers, what will they all die for? Why did Jason Hargrove die? Why did Jason Hargrove die? And of course, everybody at the same time dealing with all this reality, whether they're experiencing it directly by driving buses and dying or just watching their friends drive buses and die. There's all that. And then you got so many people experiencing so many different forms of isolation. And that reminds me of Alistair Hewlett. So there's so much going on at the time, and then among all the other things is all this isolation, right, and then all this depression, anxiety, and then of course after a while it's being talked about all over the time, all the time on the news, and among all kinds of other things, and it really varies so much depending on whether you have family, at home with lots of people, kids and stuff, keeping you occupied, or if you're just alone or with one other person or in an abusive relationship. I mean, any number of such a massive variety of different ways to feel isolated. But then even the people in their happy little families who are feeling relatively less isolated, then they have to deal with, the kids not being able to go to school and trying to work. And I mean, it's just, basically, it's a situation for a lot of folks. Green Dragon, Oregon's finest, right here. And so I wrote a lot of songs, actually, quite a few songs on the subject of isolation, over the course of the 2020, and other songs, all these subjects. All these subjects had songs, multiple songs on them, whether the subject was the cops or isolation or collapse of the housing market or whatever, Like Picasso has his blue period, right? They say all my songs sound the same. All his artwork looked the same, too. But that doesn't, but he was still really good. Each time I leave the apartment, things change a little more. The rug pulled out so many times, who knows where's the floor. Folks look more ragged by the day, I can give them a few bucks. Wonder what the future holds, wish them luck as I walk on by. See the people on their porches, chairs out on a deck. Sometimes you can tell which ones received their checks, which ones are still waiting after all these many weeks, wondering if this is what it smells like up Schitt's Creek. Walk on by. When my children ask me, I'm not quite sure what to say. Why the playground's always empty, where the kids all used to play. Why the people cross the street now, whenever we come near. Where did all the people go who used to be here as I walk on by? Go out with my headphones on, like everybody else does. listening for news suddenly relevant because we all want to know how the virus might transform all of us still here, weathering this storm as I walk on by. As I walk on by. As I walk on by. So, I made a bit of a set list here. So then, so there was, within weeks of the lockdown, there was a rent strike being organized in many different parts of the country, especially in the more rent-burdened parts. And this was starting to happen right away because it was already a crisis before the pandemic, the housing crisis. And so basically immediately, as soon as, people couldn't work, then they couldn't pay the rent. I mean, it was like an immediate thing because, of course, something like half of the country is not in a position to be able to afford such an expense. In fact, I think 40% of the country is unable to afford an unexpected expense of $400. So the unexpected expense of usually much more than that to pay for rent was not affordable for most people. So it became a crisis here in the U.S. right away. And, basically a continually, partially, or unaddressed crisis. And then, of course, times like crises tend to also give rise to a lot of people imagining how things could be done differently in a way that doesn't produce such crisis. So I wrote a bunch of these songs, these kind of imagination songs. This one's called Our Imagination. It was commonly seen on the walls of Paris in 1968. Those who lack imagination cannot imagine what is lacking. It's at moments like these, everything is in the air. The possibilities are nowhere and everywhere. Gotta break a bone to set it. Now all we are is broke. A lot of folks are saying it's time to be woke. And they're not talking about microaggressions, but the really big ones. The basic assumptions, like planets circling suns. But there are no natural laws that built your mansions or your tents. These are creations of society, just like mortgages and rent. It's a future of uncertainty, but our liberation can only be as free as our imagination. If you were born and raised to believe it's sacrosanct that whoever has a whole lot of money in the bank deserves to then live off the wealth from the houses that they own, and if they raise your rent you can move or take out a loan, then how can you demand your human rights if you don't believe you have any, as if you deserve your plate? But if things were hard before, now the system has flatlined. Time for those basic rights to be redefined. It's a future of uncertainty, but our liberation can only be as free as our imagination. All all these vaunted freedoms added to the Constitution as an afterthought after Shays' rebellion did not include the right to land, or the right to eat, or the right for human beings not to be dying on the street. It's moments like these, standing on the edge, that we might catch the strongest breeze to land furthest from the ledge. We can fly, you know. All you need is wings. We can house and feed each other. Together, we can do anything. It's a future of uncertainty. But our liberation can only be as free as our imagination. It's at moments like these, everything is in the air. The possibilities are nowhere and everywhere. So, that was all going on. A lot of stuff was going on. And then came May 25th. Jacob Blake was walking to his SUV. Alton Sterling was selling DVDs. Eric Garner had just broken up a fight. Breonna Taylor was asleep in the middle of the night. Tamir Rice was playing in the park. Elijah McClain was out walking after dark. Dominique Clayton was sleeping in her bed where she was shot by a cop in the back of her head. Say their names. Say their names. Say their names. Say their names. Walter Scott was driving to a store. Betty Jones was answering her door. Philando Castile was driving home with his girlfriend. Anthony Hill was naked on the grass when he met his end. Edsel Ford was walking in his neighborhood. Michael Brown was blown away just standing where he stood. Kendra James was shot to death at a traffic stop by unaccountable killer cop. Say their names. Say their names. Say their names. Say their names. Atiana Jefferson was playing a video game with her little nephew. Gunned down just the same. Oscar Grant was celebrating the new year, handcuffed when the shots rang out that everyone could hear. Eric Reason pulled into a parking spot. Not long after that was when he was shot. George Floyd was just shopping in a store. Micah Xavier Johnson thought he was still at war. Say their names. 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 The past 4 songs and the next one are, among a couple others actually, are on the album that's coming up called Rebel Songs, Free the Imagination, which is me and Spank Hopkins on drums and Arcellus Sykes on bass with Billy Oskay producing. We just recorded tracks of 12 songs, including those, past four and this next one. And then they are now in the digitally speaking, in the hands of Paul McAdam in Ireland, where he will be doing more things to these tracks, where there's intentionally lots of room for him to do things to them. So then moving along in the timeline here. By the way, as I just to make the what is it? It would be called something station break if we were on a station. But I can see your comments if you're on, whether you are watching on Twitch, VK, LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter. I can see your comments, so feel free to make some if you have any, and also feel free to share this broadcast if you're watching it and you think somebody else would like it, and this will be out in podcast form afterwards. If you look for This Week with David Rovics, wherever you get your podcasts, you can also find my interviews, which I do multiple times a week, usually with interesting people on weekday mornings, 10 a.m. Pacific, live on whatever platform you're watching on. And so after May 25th and the public execution over the course of 8 minutes and 46 seconds of George Floyd, who incidentally was a friend and acquaintance of people I knew who lived in Minneapolis. He was a well-known, well-loved person there who often worked as a bouncer at bars that were frequented by wonderful folks. And then there were protests, of course, that started up all over the country. And here in Portland, too. And there were, I don't know, like I'd love to, somebody needs to write a book about this or a documentary or something, and maybe already has, but like some of the, see, this is why I mentioned that I can see comments, and then somebody says, thank you so much, your songs are so touching. So that's exactly the kind of thing. I just loved seeing that kind of thing, because otherwise you're just looking at a screen, which is not like looking at an audience. We need to work at that. Actually, I guess everybody's going to be in, we'll all have VR of some kind, of virtual reality or whatever, and we can all like be in an actual room together and do concerts and stuff like that on the internet. I mean, I'm not saying that we should, because I'd rather be in the real world, but if we're going to be doing concerts on the internet, we can do better than this, hopefully sometime, eventually we can do a little, like we're in a room together. That would be kind of nice. But that would be cool for meetings too, I think, rather than everybody staring at each other on Zoom or whatever. But what would really be nice if we could just go back outside. Okay. Anyway, back on track here. We're in June. There's protests going on, and then like among other things, so the police are just unloading massive amounts of so-called non-lethal weapons, and here in Portland and many other places, and clearly there's, with the internet and everything else, I mean, this is not new either. It dates back to way before the internet, but there's lots of communication going on between different protesters in different parts of the world. And like back when Michael Brown and the Ferguson protests were going on, there was a lot of people mentioning how, the tear gas canisters were from Pennsylvania and had little American flags on them, whether they were in Ferguson or in Palestine. And people were taking pictures and comparing notes from tear gas fired by various entities. And of course, the same is true with all sorts of tactics for dealing with tear gas and other weaponry. And so the umbrellas that became very, very popularized in Hong Kong years ago have really spread, because I mean, umbrellas are just very useful for all sorts of things, despite the fact that they're kind of just they break easily and whatever. But still, they have lots of uses. And in fact, other things are useful too, like leaf blowers, which I hate generally, leaf blowers, but I love them now. And I have an electric one, which takes care of the whole. I didn't. What I really don't like about leaf blowers is the gas, the fumes, But the noise, that's fun, And the actual effect is also fun. And so, we have a saying around here: leaf blowers, they're not just for tear gas anymore. So this is another song. Actually, this song, it will be on the upcoming album Rebel Songs, which incidentally, if you're a community-supported art member, you can hear the rough tracks of Rebel Songs already, but the rest of you have to wait until it's actually out as an album. Poor folks. But this song has not been put on any kind of album, but it will be. Been 2 months now since that cop took a knee, like a knee upon the neck of a whole society. Folks rose up all over, starting there in the Midwest. The National Guard came in upon the governor's request. Wherever people took the streets, riot cops attacked, shooting folks in their faces and their backs. Flooding streets with tear gas. See how the people stand with masks upon their faces and leaf blowers in their hands. There have been drive-by shootings and weaponizing trucks, but the death count's what it is so far is partly up to luck and partly up to barricades used to block the way so folks might live to fight another day. That is if they're not killed by agents of the state, like the ones who came to Portland to make America great, to face a rainbow nation that says screw your white homeland, with masks upon their faces and leaf blowers in their hands. As they kidnap people off the streets here in the global north, as the tear gas billows, the poison belches forth, as those who would be dictators make their power play, as people from all over town face them down and say, we don't want police, a better world can be built. Perhaps it starts with someone's hand upon the hilt, making tornadoes out of tear gas. Maybe not what Mama planned, with masks upon their faces and leaf blowers in their hands. It's been 2 months now since that cop took a knee. And so there was then a lot of other things. Protests were going on, and the repression and the right-wingers organizing and driving their vehicles into the protesters, and all sorts of things were happening. And so then, and of course, the right-wingers are putting out their typical narrative, which is perhaps best summarized by Trump visiting South Dakota and the Black Hills, the sacred Black Hills that were desecrated in so many ways, including by making this terrible statue. Huge, terrible statue. Somebody in Germany heard the broadcast about Phil Oakes on Phil Oakes' 80th birthday on December 19th, and I'm so glad that they did that broadcast on German radio and remember Phil. The interview that I did with the broadcaster, Thomas, is also up on my podcast if you want to hear it, the English version of the interview as well. So then when Trump went to visit Mount Rushmore, as I walk down the streets of this city, see the desperate looks everywhere, the thin faces across this society, the lost and the long-distance stares, as I call the employment department, and the line is once more occupied in this nation that was born on the 4th of July. As I hear of the nooses and lynchings, as I listen to the president speak, upholding foundations of enslavement and slaughter beneath the destroyed mountain peak, as he talks of restoring America while ignoring all those who have died in this nation that was born on the 4th of July. When I see the masked faces around me, across from the policemen lined up in a row, watching them once more astound me as they fire their weapons wherever we go, shooting reporters and legal observers as the curfew is once more defied in this nation that was born on the 4th of July. As I hear all the voices so loudly shouting, empty the prisons, defund the police, reasoning so very soundly, occupied by this army, how could we ever have peace? As I hear of the dead from LA to New York, a catastrophe no one can deny in this nation that was born on the 4th of July. As I survey the wreckage around me, all the boarded up windows of the stores that have closed, as I take in the scene that surrounds me, all the inequities starkly exposed that tug at the roots of this country, which began with a war that was based on a lie when this nation was born on the 4th of July. When this nation was born on the 4th of July. So then, in the Netherlands, wonderful. We got so many different countries. I love it. It's very much like what Utah Phillips would always say, that he's famous among dozens of people worldwide. And that is exactly reflected on one of these shows on the internet, which is wonderful. And so then we are moving on in this review of 2020. This is a review of 2020, a musical review of 2020. For a much more exhaustive review of 2020, you can go to davidrovics.com/2020music, which has a much bigger playlist of these and other songs. And then also I have a book called David Rovics on 2020, which is a PDF or actual physical book very soon, which you can check out at davidrovics.com/merch. If you are interested, or if you're a subscriber, you will have gotten the PDF version anyway. And it contains curated songs and essays from 2020 of mine. And glad to see folks there. Mexico, Minneapolis. Wonderful. So it was like the most surreal thing. I mean, it's been a very surreal year altogether, of course, but then, moments. I mean, there's so many things about this, this sort of little apocalypse that is so much more interesting and complex and just a much more exciting plot line than any of the movies that I've ever read or seen, or any of the books I've ever read. Really, it's like the reality is so much more interesting. And that, but then also in terms of just the kind of plot twists that happen. I mean, you just like it's never just one thing at a time. I mean, it would be way, way too complex of a plot for a movie. It would only work potentially if it were like a really long, many, many seasons of a series. But so then, like, we're in the midst of protests, around police violence and inequities in society generally, and a lot of other things. And then this is all going on pretty much full steam ahead in many ways. By some accounts, it's trailing, but I think that was like only for a few days. But basically, all this is going on, and then the entire western half of the country catches on fire. I mean, play another game of Scrabble, put the kids to bed. Marvel at them, marvel with them at the way the sky is turning red. Keep close tabs on the news where the fires have arrived. Bags packed and ready if we need to run for our lives. See the world darken in the middle of the day. Hear the stories of the people whose towns were burned away. Tens of thousands driving, obeying the mandate. Move faster than the fire and evacuate to a parking lot in Clackamas, camping in smoke, wondering what remains unburnt, unbroke. If things had been unpredictable, they just got even more as fire burns the world from the mountains to the shore. Will this place exist tomorrow? It's just a mystery as we're living through the flames of history. Play another game of Scrabble, rallies have to wait. Even the most dedicated aren't out to demonstrate. Maybe packing their belongings or helping others do the same. Almost missing all the tear gas before the fires came. They call this the city of bridges, but if we get the cue to evacuate due north, there are only two. Will this place exist tomorrow? It's just a mystery as we're living through the flames of history. Play another game of Scrabble. Follow every tweet of anyone who might be vaguely related to the beat. Say sorry to the kids for always looking at my phone. Their alerts app doesn't work, no message and no tone. If you don't have a way to fly, there's nowhere much to go. Just look out at the horizon, hope not to see it glow. Will this place exist tomorrow? It's just a mystery as we're living through the flames of history. Play another game of Scrabble, put the kids to bed. Oh, that's wonderful. I mean, I'm just looking at comments online, and it's wonderful to see Petra from 2000 in New York City from 20 years ago popping up there. I remember you when you were a college student and you organized a gig. I believe that's how we met. Isn't that right? I mean, yeah, but wonderful. Well, I'm looking at my set list here. I made a set list because I do not have a very chronological memory. So I wanted to go in order here in terms of a selection of songs that are related to, or actually more like directly about 2020, as has been here in Portland particularly. Yeah, I hope to be playing live again someday as well. I mean, for those of you out there, who I have so many contacts on the internet, but who may or may not be related to the physical world. But for those of you from the U.S. who wonder, maybe long before the pandemic, what happened to me before we maybe reconnected here in the internet during the pandemic, I basically have not been touring the U.S. for many years. For financial reasons, and I've written a lot about it if anybody's interested in the industrial collapse of the music business. But it just hasn't been viable for me to tour in the U.S. for many years. Unfortunately, I miss it very much. Although I love Europe, and that's how I make a living until the pandemic hit, was mainly by touring Europe. And through the community-supported art program, Patreon-style crowdfunding. But in terms of tours that actually, you can do a tour and come home with more money than you left with, Europe, that's pretty much it. But it's been nice to be stuck in Portland all this time here, and since really getting to know my kids and the town that I live in, where I'm now all the time instead of just half the time, and I don't regret a thing. Although I'm sorry about the pandemic, everybody out there. And so then moving on in this review of 2020. After the apocalypse, it's the fiery kind rather than the cop-related kind, and protests, and rather than burning down the town, and after trashing the corporate stores, it's more like everything's getting burned down, with no regard to whether it's a corporate store or not. But mostly things are getting burned down that are in the exurbs, out in the forests, out in the places that people are forced to live in because they can't afford to live in the center of the cities, which are generally much more protected in many ways. But out there on the edges of the suburbs is where, you got all the trailer parks, and that's where you got, so many of the people who lost their homes for all kinds of reasons. But as that's all going on, then it's like basically the flames have basically barely sort of, where the flames are actually still burning, raging, actually, in fact, in California in particular, by the time, I believe it was September 17th or somewhere around there, where Attorney General William Barr, with the full support of the president, obviously, declared that Portland was an anarchist jurisdiction along with Seattle and New York City. If this were an anarchist jurisdiction, as the president likes to say, then Kendra James and Juanis Hayes would be alive today. They would not have been gunned down by a racist police force because we would have defunded it long ago, of course, taking all that money to spend on things that people need, not violent gangs of thugs in blue making people bleed. If this were an anarchist jurisdiction, as the Attorney General tells, then we would already have emptied all those prison cells, housing the mentally ill and so many, many more who are only locked up for being sick or for being poor, for having been set up, or for crimes of poverty. There'd be none of that nonsense under our authority. If this were an anarchist jurisdiction, it'd be a beautiful scene with so much less asphalt, so much more green, And there would be no tear gas, no eviction raids. You'd see what solutions look like when they're not just band-aids. If the people ran this city, not just the millionaires, we'd take the stolen profits, that which they call theirs. If this were an anarchist jurisdiction, as the brown shirts oft repeat, you would not see these tents and couches lining every street. Without control by corporate interests that dominate our lives, making sure that they have everything while we're lucky to survive. It's profit over people, no matter how much blood they shed. If we were calling the shots, then you'd turn that on its head. If this were an anarchist jurisdiction. So that's, they called it an anarchist jurisdiction. They declared Howard Zinn a propagandist. I wrote a song about that. All this bizarre stuff was going on in the midst of everything else. People trying to come to terms with, or expose so much such massively charged, horrific history and current events. Mass incarceration, slavery, so much going on, so much being talked about. And then, of course, on top of all that, you got, the far right and the Republican. I mean, just so many different elements, just constantly pouring fuel on the fires, sometimes literally. And so people want to escape. This is going to be on the upcoming album too. Another new song that's never been on an album. The musicians who, the bass player and the drummer who played on this upcoming album are very consummate local professional musicians who I highly recommend hiring if you're ever looking for drummers and bass players. But, and the very, the really professional studio musicians, you don't, and same with engineers and producers. I'm sure it's the same in theater with directors and TV with directors and with editors and whatever. It's like in this professional, realm, actually, which you may or may not realize exists, but there's this whole, professional musician world out there that especially used to exist, still does to some extent. And, there are certain ethics, and one of those things is you just basically would never say whether you like something or not, because then if you're being paid, it's sort of you just wouldn't. It's just like you wouldn't think it particularly ethical somehow to say you like something because it's just it's just not done. Oftentimes people just be no expression. If that something worked, that's another matter. But whether it was good, that's that's how it is. Not that I've never had a studio musician or an engineer or something say, "Oh, that's a great song" or something. That also happens, but it's But I would say, having said that, this is definitely the drummer's favorite song on the album. The news isn't getting any brighter. The death toll isn't getting any lighter. There's a dark pall drifting overhead with so many more people dead. Turn on the computer or the TV set. It's a world full of anger and death threats. What could happen if life could be supported somewhere else where things might be better sorted? A place where some could start anew, another way to say we're not through, despite all of the destruction, all the bad decisions made, all of the madness we could trade for a place more remote than primate or penguin has ever been. There's a discovery, a silver lining for the cloud that has some folks singing out loud. There's water on the moon way up there. Maybe you and I should go live on a frozen lake without a care, looking down at the earth below. The cafes are all closed. You won't miss the sight of someone bringing to your table a flat white. We can still make espresso up there in our bubbles, breathing freshly manufactured air. When we go outside, we can jump so high, you speak into your mic, I'll hear your reply. We can look at the green earth, wish it well, from up in the place that makes the waves swell. There's water on the moon way up there. Maybe you and I should go live on a frozen lake without a care, looking down at the earth below. Up there life is simple, with just a couple distractions, too few of us to form a faction. We all practice great lunar hygiene, all tested, cleared, and quarantined. Go back to visit now and again the planet that we lived in way back then, before the satellites found H2O, and some of us said, fuck it, let's go. There's water on the moon way up there. Maybe you and I should go live on a frozen lake without a care, looking down at the earth below. There's water on the moon way up there. Maybe you and I should go live on a frozen lake without a care, looking down at the earth below. There's water on the moon. So, there's a couple more songs I have in this set list of songs from 2020. This is a musical review of 2020. We are broadcasting on my YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, VK, LinkedIn, and Twitch channels, as we often do, weekday mornings at 10 a.m. Pacific when I'm interviewing folks, and last Saturdays at 1 p.m. Pacific when I'm doing concerts. Last Saturdays of the month, which is today. And these songs are not, they're far from all the songs I've written in 2020, but they are chronological. And it was basically in the past a couple months in particular, that you start hearing from all these nurses and doctors talking about how, like, they're intubating people who don't actually believe the virus is real, or didn't, until they got it, And, you can think, well, what a dumb person, but that's a very limited perspective, I think. And actually, if you think about why people develop the perspective they do have, makes more sense. And this is about that. They lied about the wars, took time to figure out that democracy and freedom was not what it was about. They said we'd fight the terrorists, but all that I could see was I was occupying someone else's country. They lied about the weapons. They all were so convinced. The generals on the TV, haven't heard from them since. They say it was an accident, but I think it was their plan. They spread the lie on CNN and NPR and C-SPAN. They lied about the jobs all the pundits used to say before this city was abandoned and the good jobs went away. Sign up to this free trade bill, win-win all around. Now half the guys I used to know are 6 feet underground. Lying is all they seem to do. Looking at us on TV, they pretend they care, but it's all about the money, which anyone can tell. If you have half a brain, why I should believe them now, it just seems insane. Talk turned to the virus, what we all stood to lose. I was not the only one who thought it was fake news. I just went about my life like I normally would do. So maybe I'll catch a cold, I thought, or a little flu. They lie about so much, I wish it were not true. But from this hospital bed, if I could just click undo, I guess I would have worn a mask, stayed home to quarantine instead of being intubated. Hooked up to this machine, you can say that I'm an idiot. Maybe, I don't know. But before I take my leave, before I have to go, before they stick me in a box with quarters on my eyes, there's lots of blame to go around here, and I know where it lies. They lied about the wars. That's gonna be the first track on the upcoming album, Rebel Songs. And yeah. And this is going to be the second track on it. I'm going to leave you with this one. I'm actually kind of in the midst of 2 different album projects, both involving Big Red Studio and Other Place Studios, both multiple musician album projects happening at the same time. And it's hard to exactly know how to explain that phenomenon going on right now at the same time, but I'm very happy about it. And both involve stellar musicians, different groups of stellar musicians, some from Portland, others from elsewhere, like Ireland. And you can see some of there's a professional photographer named Sean McDonald, a wonderful photographer who came over to the studio a few weeks ago and took pictures of me and Mike Crenshaw and Adam Carpinelli and Billy Oskey and other folks involved with that project, with one of the projects, which is called Take the Power Back. And then there's the other project is the Rebel Songs project, and you can actually see photographs on Instagram from both of those projects. But then you have to see photographs of my little children too. They're all mixed up in there, like it or not. And so the last song I'll do for this occasion of this review of 2020. Musical review of 2020 is a song that perhaps, I mean, among all the crises, all the stuff going on, all the fissures in society being exacerbated in so many ways, with all that's happening, it may end up being once again that the housing crisis is the crisis of the pandemic, more than even the pandemic itself and more than anything else. We'll see, depending on what the state does with its capitalism. Whether capitalism wins or society wins. That'll be the question. The class war will be the question. who comes out surviving capitalism or society. Those are the options. And so either, basically, when we personify these things, it's it's either us or it's Jared Kushner. Jared Kushner represents capitalism pretty well. So and he's actually evicting. He's working on. He, as a landlord, not just as a presidential advisor, but as a landlord who owns, inherited wealth and thousands of rental properties himself, he's working during the whole impending eviction crisis. He is one of the landlords who's actually filing eviction papers when the eviction ban is lifted, that his lawyers can, file all these evictions, of his tenants. So that's what he's about, along with so many others. My next essay that I'll be, actually it's on my blog now. I'll be publishing it elsewhere soon, but it's addressing this question, which I've written a lot about in song and essays, but most recently about the Oregon landlord lobby, as represented by an entity called Multifamily Northwest, who are suing the state of Oregon because they say that the state working it out in such a way that 80% of the landlords unpaid back rent from people who couldn't pay rent during the pandemic, paying them back 80% isn't good enough. And so they're suing that for all 100% to be covered by the state, as if there's something about their 100% of their profits that's just like, they deserve it. I mean, it's their property. I mean, who would question such a thing? Property. Who'd ever question property? All the Jared Kushners of the world, and all the money that you own, you who look at us with such indifference, sitting upon your throne, from which you collect all the rent from your subjects in all the most gentrified towns, regardless of whether a global pandemic have forced us to shut everything down. All the Jared Kushners of the world, for whom the ceiling is the sky. For you life comes so easy, inherited from birth. Why would you ever ask why? Do you think you earned it all? It's up to you how much you charge. It's all yours to keep. Would you climb any mountain of corpses, no matter how slippery, no matter how steep? All the Jared Kushners of the world, is your appetite ever met? At what point do you ever wonder just how fucked you can make things get? Before it's bad enough that even you and your investors can see the whole thing's gonna fall. Just how top heavy can an icon be before it can't stand up at all? To all the Jared Kushners of the world, how do you expect things will transpire when all your filings are enforced and the moratorium expires? Do you envision a neat row of U-Haul trucks, tenants all packed up to leave? Their homes, your businesses, their neighborhoods, their cemeteries, where they used to go to grieve. To all the Jared Kushners of the world, all your ill-begotten gains, you who sit comfortably in your limousine, ignoring all the blood stains. Have you seen this movie before? Was it good? What's your favorite scene? Mine's when they take off the blindfold and the king meets his guillotine. To all the Jared Kushners of the world. And this has been a musical review of 2020. I hope that whoever you all out there who's been watching has been enjoying the concert. Thank you. And I'll be back doing more broadcasts soon with another essay, uh, audio essay, and more interviews and other things. You know, the usual stuff that I do on here on these platforms on the internet when I'm not touring. And we'll see what the future holds. But thanks for listening, everybody. And if you want to check out the rough mix of the upcoming album or support my recording and broadcasting efforts, then please go to patreon.com/davidrovics or davidrovics.com/subscribe and become a subscriber, and then you get all kinds of cool shit on the internet and in the mail. And then you support my career and make it possible for me to keep doing this stuff, as many of you already are doing, because I recognize most of you commenting, and I'm preaching to the converted. But in case any of you aren't converted, I'm preaching to you too. And then I'll stop with that, and I'll go. And thanks so much, everybody out there in the world. And it's been a really a pleasure hanging out with you in my living room. Despite the fact that I have to translate these text images on these, passing by on the screen and pretend I'm looking at an audience, I'm getting better at that, though. Now I understand a bit more those folks on the Matrix in the submarine who are looking at the screens and they are seeing people and we're just seeing green, letters. That's the future for all of us. On that note, remember, mutual aid will get us through. Don't pay the rent. Trust your neighbors.